I was 7 years old when my mother bent down, held my face in her hands, and promised she would be home before my next birthday. She smiled with the confidence that only adults seem to have, as if the future could be planned with a few simple words. Then she kissed my forehead and slipped a tiny silver bracelet around my wrist. "Keep this safe, Ava," she whispered. "When I come back, I'll bring the matching one." I looked at the bracelet sparkling in the morning sunlight and nodded with complete certainty. "I'll wait," she smiled again, but this time the smile did not quite reach her eyes. Children believe promises because they have never learned how complicated life can become. They do not ask whether circumstances might change or whether people sometimes lose themselves while chasing dreams. They simply trust the voices that comfort them, and they build their little worlds on those words. Looking back now, I realize that broken promises hurt the most when they come from the people we love without question. My name is Ava Carter, and this is the story of the woman who left to build the life she thought she wanted, and the man who quietly built the life I truly needed. The taxi waited outside our small white house, while rain tapped gently against the windows. My father carried my mother's suitcase to the curb without saying a single word. His movements were slow and careful, as though delaying each step might somehow delay her departure. My mother stood beside the open taxi door and looked back at us. For a brief moment, nobody moved. The driver checked his watch but remained silent. My father finally spoke. "You don't have to go." His voice was calm, almost gentle, yet I could hear something trembling beneath it. My mother looked down at the wet pavement. "If I don't take this opportunity now, I'll never forgive myself." "And what about us?" She closed her eyes before answering. "I'm doing this for all of us." Even as a child, I noticed that my father did not argue anymore. He simply nodded, stepped back, and rested one hand on my shoulder. I waved excitedly. "When will you come home?" She forced another smile. "Before your birthday." The taxi pulled away. I kept waving until it disappeared around the corner. My father continued staring at the empty street long after the car was gone. Only years later did I understand that some people leave in a single morning, while the people who remain spend years learning how to live with that empty space. Before everything changed, our family had lived an ordinary life, filled with small routines that felt unimportant at the time. Every Saturday morning, my father made blueberry pancakes while old jazz music played softly in the kitchen. My mother watered the flowers growing beneath the front window before checking work emails on her phone. After breakfast, we usually walked to the public library, where my father worked, and spent hours surrounded by books. Those simple weekends felt endless. I never imagined they would become memories so quickly. My father, Ethan Carter, believed that books could heal people in quiet ways. Whenever someone borrowed a novel, he never simply scanned the barcode and handed it across the desk. Instead, he always asked, "What kind of story do you need today?" Some visitors laughed at the unusual question. Others answered honestly. "I need something hopeful. I need something funny. I need something that helps me forget." He somehow managed to find the perfect book every time. Watching him work taught me that kindness often begins with listening instead of speaking. Most people carry worries they never mention aloud, and sometimes the greatest gift we can offer is making them feel seen before trying to solve their problems. My mother, Claire, was different. She had grown up in a tiny apartment where money was always scarce. She often told me stories about wearing secondhand clothes and watching her parents worry over unpaid bills. "I promised myself something when I was your age," she once said while brushing my hair before school. I promised that my children would never know what that kind of fear feels like. At the time, I thought she was talking about love. Years later, I realized she had been talking about success. As the weeks passed, her phone rang more often than ever before. Business trips became longer, family dinners became shorter. Sometimes she was physically sitting at the table while mentally attending another meeting hundreds of miles away. One evening, my father served homemade vegetable soup. My mother barely touched it. "I'm flying to Chicago tomorrow," she said while reading another email. "You just came back yesterday," my father replied quietly. "I know. You've missed 3 family dinners this week." She looked up from her phone. "I'm trying to build something important." He smiled sadly. So am I." Neither of them raised their voices. Neither of them insulted the other. The silence between those 2 simple sentences felt heavier than any argument I had ever heard. Children often believe that families fall apart because people stop loving one another. Sometimes the truth is much quieter. Families can slowly drift apart when 2 people begin chasing different versions of happiness without realizing how far they have already traveled. A month later, my school announced its annual Family Day celebration. Every student was invited to bring a parent. For an entire week, my classmates talked about baking cookies with their mothers, building crafts with their fathers, and taking photographs together. I could hardly wait. The night before the celebration, I found my mother folding clothes into another suitcase. "You're leaving again?" She nodded without looking up. "It's only for 3 days. But tomorrow is Family Day." Her hands stopped moving. "Oh, you forgot." She slowly sat beside me on the bed. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. You can still stay." She gently held my hands. "If I cancel this trip, someone else will get the promotion." "I don't care about the promotion." She looked away before answering. "I know." For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she hugged me tightly. "So Dad will come? If he can leave work." She kissed my forehead. "I'll make it up to you." I wanted to believe her. I truly did. The next morning, every classroom was filled with smiling parents, carrying cakes, flowers, balloons, and cameras. I sat quietly beside the empty chair reserved for my family. The teacher smiled kindly. "I'm sure someone is coming." I nodded, even though I was no longer certain. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. I kept glancing toward the classroom door every time footsteps echoed in the hallway. Finally, the door burst open. My father hurried inside, breathing heavily and still wearing his library name badge. In one hand, he held a paper bag. "I'm not too late, am I?" I ran across the classroom before he had even finished speaking. "You came." He laughed softly while hugging me. "I told Mrs. Wilson to watch the library for a few hours." "What about work?" He shrugged. "Books can wait." Then he handed me the paper bag. Inside was a handmade bookmark decorated with pressed flowers. Across the front, he had carefully written one sentence: "Every great story begins with someone who refuses to give up." "I made it this morning," he said. One of my classmates looked at the bookmark and whispered, "Your dad actually made that?" I smiled proudly. "He makes lots of things." The teacher gathered everyone for family photographs. As parents stood beside their children, someone quietly asked me where my mother was. Before I could answer, my father gently squeezed my shoulder. "She's working today." The teacher nodded politely and continued arranging everyone. During the activities, I noticed my father laughing, helping other children finish their craft projects, and fixing a broken picture frame for one of the parents. He made every child around him smile. Nobody noticed that he never once looked at his own phone. Nobody except me. That evening, after dinner, I woke up because I heard a sound coming from the living room. I quietly walked down the hallway. My father sat alone on the couch, holding our old family photo. The house was completely silent except for the soft ticking of the clock. He covered his face with both hands. His shoulders began to shake. It was the first time I had ever seen my father cry. I wanted to run into the room and hug him. Instead, I stood frozen behind the doorway because I suddenly understood something that frightened me. The strongest person in my world was hurting, and there was nothing I could do to make the pain disappear. I returned to bed without making a sound. Outside, the rain began falling again. My birthday was only 3 weeks away. I still wore the silver bracelet every single day because I believed another matching bracelet was already waiting for me somewhere. I had no idea that my birthday would arrive. The candles would be lit, and the empty chair beside my father would remain empty from the beginning of the party until the very last guest went home. Before I share the rest of the story, I need to know, where are you listening from? I would love to hear from you. My 8th birthday arrived with sunshine, balloons, and a chocolate cake that my father baked after staying awake long past midnight. He covered the kitchen with flour, burned the first cake, laughed at his own mistake, and started all over again. By the time I woke up, the second cake was waiting on the table with bright blue candles and a card that simply read, "Happy birthday to my favorite storyteller." I smiled the moment I saw it, but my eyes still drifted toward the front window. Every few minutes, I looked outside. Every time a car slowed down, my heart beat a little faster. My father noticed, although he pretended not to. When our neighbors arrived with birthday presents, he greeted them warmly. When my friends sang the birthday song, he smiled as though nothing was missing. He wanted my day to feel complete, even though he knew we were both waiting for someone who never came. Late that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat on the front steps with the silver bracelet still wrapped around my wrist. "Maybe her flight was delayed," I whispered. My father sat beside me without answering immediately. After a long silence, he gently placed his arm around my shoulders. Sometimes adults make promises they truly believe they can keep. But she said she would come. "I know. Do you think she forgot me?" He turned toward me so quickly that I could see tears gathering in his eyes. "No, Ava. Never believe that." "Then why isn't she here?" For several seconds, he searched for words that could explain something he barely understood himself. Finally, he spoke quietly. "I think your mother forgot how quickly children grow while adults are busy making plans." His answer did not erase my sadness, but it kept something precious alive inside me. It protected me from believing that I had somehow become unlovable. As I grew older, I realized that children often blame themselves for the choices adults make. They wonder whether they were too noisy, too difficult, or somehow not enough. The truth is far different. Most of the time, adults are fighting battles inside themselves that have nothing to do with the children who love them. Life slowly settled into a new routine. Every morning, my father packed my lunch before leaving for the library. Without fail, he tucked a folded note inside my lunchbox. Some notes made me laugh. "Never trust a squirrel with your sandwich." Others made me think, "Mistakes are proof that you're trying." My favorite one simply said, "The world needs your kindness more than your perfection." I collected every note inside a small wooden box beneath my bed. Whenever I missed my mother, I read one of them before going to sleep. Somehow, my father's words always made the house feel a little less empty. When I turned 10, I discovered that the public library where my father worked was facing serious financial problems. The city council planned to reduce its budget because fewer people were borrowing printed books. One evening, I walked into the library after school and found several employees gathered around the front desk. Everyone looked worried. "We may have to cut staff," one librarian said. Another quietly asked, "Do we know who?" Nobody answered. As we walked home that afternoon, I finally asked, "Are you going to lose your job?" My father smiled gently. "I don't know. Weren't you scared?" "Of course. You don't look scared." He looked at the orange leaves blowing across the sidewalk before answering. "Being brave doesn't mean you stop feeling afraid. It means you keep walking even while fear is holding your hand." That sentence stayed with me long after the conversation ended. A few weeks later, my English teacher announced a national writing competition. Students from across the country could submit one original story, and the winner would receive a scholarship to attend a summer writing academy. Mrs. Reynolds placed the application form on my desk. "You should enter." "I've never written anything that important." She smiled. Every important writer once believed exactly the same thing. That afternoon, I carried the application home. My father read every page carefully before looking at me with the biggest smile I had seen in months. "We're doing this." "We?" He laughed. "Writing may be your adventure, but cheering for you is definitely mine." Every evening after dinner, we worked together. I wrote the first draft while he quietly organized books at the kitchen table. When I became frustrated, he never corrected my story immediately. Instead, he asked questions. What does your character want most? What is she afraid to lose? How can your reader feel what she feels instead of simply reading about it? Little by little, my story became stronger. So did my confidence. The competition results arrived near the beginning of summer. I won first place. For a few wonderful minutes, every worry disappeared. My father lifted me off the ground and spun me around the living room until we were both laughing too hard to speak. "You did it!" he shouted. "No," I laughed. "We did it." The scholarship covered almost everything. Almost. There were still travel costs, books, and accommodation fees that we could not easily afford. I quietly folded the letter. "It's okay, Dad." He looked at me with complete certainty. "No." "What do you mean?" "I mean you're going." "We don't have enough money." "We'll find it." Over the next month, he accepted extra evening shifts at the library, helped organize community events on weekends, and even repaired old books for a nearby university after regular working hours. He came home exhausted. His hands were rough from repairing worn bindings. Dark circles slowly appeared beneath his eyes. One Saturday afternoon, I returned home early because a neighborhood event had been canceled. The house was unusually quiet. I heard voices coming from the dining room. Before I entered, I recognized my father's voice. "I understand." Another man answered softly. "I'm sorry, Ethan. It's worth more than this, but it's the best offer I can make." Curious, I stepped into the room. The man quickly left after shaking my father's hand. On the table rested a small velvet box. It was empty. "What was that?" I asked. My father looked toward the box for several seconds before answering. "My wedding ring." I stared at him. "You sold it?" He nodded slowly. "It was just sitting in a drawer." "But it belonged to you. It gave us many beautiful years." He smiled sadly. "Now it's going to help give you beautiful years too." Tears filled my eyes almost instantly. "I don't want to go anymore." He walked over and gently held my shoulders. "Listen to me, Ava." I looked up. If you stop chasing your dream because I made a sacrifice, then my sacrifice loses its meaning. I tried to answer, but no words came. That evening, he accidentally burned our dinner because he had fallen asleep in the kitchen chair while waiting for the oven timer. The smell of smoke filled the house. He woke suddenly, threw the ruined pan into the sink, and slammed the cupboard door harder than he intended. For one brief moment, anger flashed across his face. "I can't even cook properly anymore," he muttered. The room became completely silent. Then he noticed me standing in the doorway. His expression immediately softened. "I'm sorry." "You don't have to apologize." He shook his head. "I do." He sat down at the kitchen table and covered his face with both hands. "I keep telling myself that I can do everything." His voice cracked. "But I'm so tired, Ava." Without saying anything, I walked across the room and wrapped my arms around him. For the first time in my life, I held him the way he had always held me. We stayed like that for a long time. No speeches, no perfect answers, just a father and his daughter sharing the weight that life had placed on both of them. Sometimes strength is not found in carrying every burden alone. Sometimes true courage begins the moment we allow someone who loves us to carry a small part of the weight beside us. The following morning, as I packed for the writing academy, I found one more folded note inside my backpack. It read, "No matter how far you travel, never forget where your story began." I smiled, folded it carefully, and placed it inside the same wooden box that held every note he had ever written. As I closed the lid, I noticed something else lying at the bottom of the box. It was an unopened envelope addressed in my mother's handwriting. I had never seen it before. I stared at the envelope for several minutes before finally picking it up. My mother's handwriting covered the front in neat blue ink. For Ava, there was no stamp, no mailing date. The envelope had never been sent. I looked toward the living room where my father was reading on the sofa. He had probably forgotten the letter was hidden inside the wooden box, or perhaps he had hoped I would find it one day when I was old enough to understand. I carried it to him without opening it. "Dad?" I asked quietly. "Why is this here?" The color slowly disappeared from his face. He carefully removed his glasses before answering. "I was wondering when you would find it." "You knew about it?" He nodded. "It arrived almost 3 years ago." I looked down at the unopened envelope. "Why didn't you give it to me?" He remained silent for several moments, choosing his words with the same care he always used when repairing an old book. "Because the letter asked you to wait." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He gently reached for the envelope, but did not take it from my hands. "Your mother wrote that she wasn't ready to come home. She wanted me to tell you she loved you, but she also asked me not to let you contact her." I felt as though the room had suddenly become much smaller. Why would she ask that? Because she believed she had already disappointed you too many times. I slowly sat beside him on the sofa. "You should have told me. I thought about it every single day." His voice was steady, yet I could hear the sadness beneath every word. I finally decided that a child shouldn't spend her life waiting for letters instead of living her own story. I understood that his decision had not been easy. No parent always knows the perfect answer. Sometimes they simply choose the path that seems least likely to hurt the child they love. Looking back now, I realize that raising someone often means making impossible choices and then quietly hoping you chose the right one. I never opened the envelope. Instead, I placed it back inside the wooden box. Some stories can wait until the heart is ready to hear them. The Writing Academy changed my life in ways I never expected. For 6 wonderful weeks, I met students who loved stories as deeply as I did. We spent long afternoons discussing characters, reading one another's work, and discovering that every person carries experiences worth sharing. My teachers encouraged me to write honestly instead of trying to impress readers with complicated words. One instructor offered advice that never left me. The best stories don't make people admire the writer. They make people recognize themselves. When I returned home, I noticed another change in my father. He looked thinner. His smile remained warm, but there was a tiredness around his eyes that had not been there before. During dinner, he laughed at my stories about the academy, asked endless questions about my classmates, and celebrated every little success as though it belonged to both of us. Still, I noticed that he barely touched his own meal. A week later, the library organized its annual Community Reading Festival. Families filled the building from morning until evening, and children lined up to hear local authors read their favorite books. My father welcomed every visitor with the same kindness he had shown for years, even though I could tell he was exhausted. Around lunchtime, I was helping younger children choose books when I heard someone shout my father's name. I turned around just in time to see him grab the edge of a bookshelf for support. His face had become pale. Within seconds, he collapsed onto the floor. Everything around me seemed to stop. People rushed toward him while someone called an ambulance. I knelt beside him, holding his hand until the paramedics carefully lifted him onto a stretcher. He opened his eyes for only a moment. "I'm sorry I worried you," he whispered. I squeezed his hand. "You don't have to apologize. You just have to get better." The doctors explained that months of stress, overwork, and exhaustion had finally caught up with him. They insisted he would recover, but only if he rested completely for several weeks. When the doctor left the room, my father looked toward the hospital window. "I don't know how to stop working." "You don't have to solve everything by yourself anymore," I replied. He smiled weakly. "I've been trying to protect you for so long that I forgot you were growing strong enough to protect me too." His words stayed with me long after he fell asleep. Love changes as families grow. Parents spend years carrying their children, but time quietly reverses those roles in small and beautiful ways. One day you realize that caring for the people who once cared for you is not a burden. It is one of life's greatest privileges. While my father rested at home, I accepted a weekend job at a neighborhood bookstore. I organized shelves, recommended novels to customers, and helped children discover stories they might remember for years. The work did not pay much, but it allowed me to contribute without making my father feel helpless. At first he protested, "You should be focusing on school." "I am. You don't need to worry about money." I smiled gently. "I'm not worrying. I'm helping." He looked at me for a long moment before quietly laughing. "I suppose I taught you that." "You certainly did." Life slowly found a new rhythm, and then, almost a year later, another unexpected chapter began. One rainy Saturday afternoon, someone knocked on our front door. When I opened it, I recognized my mother immediately, although she looked very different from the woman who had stepped into the taxi years earlier. Her expensive business suits had been replaced by a simple gray coat. The confidence that once filled every room had disappeared behind tired eyes. She held a small cardboard box against her chest. "Hello, Ava." Neither of us moved. Finally, I stepped aside and invited her inside. My father walked into the hallway carrying 3 cups of tea, unaware of who had arrived. He stopped the moment he saw her. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then my mother quietly said, "Thank you for letting me come." We sat together in the living room, while rain tapped softly against the windows. She placed the cardboard box on the coffee table and slowly opened it. Inside were birthday cards addressed to me, school photographs clipped from newsletters, newspaper articles about my writing competition, every postcard I had ever sent to her work address, even the handmade bookmark my father had created years earlier had been carefully preserved beneath a sheet of clear plastic. I looked at her in confusion. "You kept all of this?" She nodded. "I kept everything." Tears filled her eyes. I didn't know how to come back after staying away for so long. My father quietly asked, "Why now?" She took a slow breath before answering. "Because I finally realized success couldn't replace the people I loved." She lowered her eyes. "After my company closed my department, I spent months sitting alone in an apartment that looked beautiful but felt completely empty. Every promotion I celebrated suddenly meant nothing because I had no one left to celebrate with." She paused before continuing. "There is something else you deserve to know." She looked directly at me. "I came back once before." I stared at her in surprise. "When?" "You were 13. My father frowned because he clearly had not known this either. She continued speaking through quiet tears. "It was your school's reading festival. I stood across the street for almost an hour. I searched my memory. I don't remember seeing you." "You didn't?" She smiled sadly. "I watched your father cheering while you read your story on stage. The two of you looked so happy together that I convinced myself you no longer needed me." She wiped away another tear. "I was wrong, but instead of finding the courage to cross the street, I walked away again." The room remained silent. No excuse could erase those lost years. No apology could return forgotten birthdays. Still, truth has a quiet power that excuses never possess. Honest regret cannot change yesterday, but it can open a door that pride keeps permanently locked. My mother never asked me to forgive her. She never demanded another chance. Instead, she came for dinner once each week. She listened more than she spoke. She accepted every uncomfortable silence without trying to fill it with empty promises. Trust returned slowly, because real healing always takes longer than a single conversation. 2 years later, I graduated from high school with honors. The auditorium overflowed with proud families carrying flowers and cameras. My mother sat in the front row. My father stood quietly near the back because he insisted the better seats should belong to other parents. When my name was announced, I crossed the stage, accepted my diploma, and smiled for the official photograph. Then I walked down the steps instead of returning directly to my seat. Hundreds of people watched as I crossed the crowded hall. I stopped in front of my father and wrapped my arms around him. He held me tightly, and neither of us tried to hide our tears. "You never missed a single important day," I whispered. He smiled through trembling eyes. "I simply showed up. You showed me what love looks like." A few moments later, my mother joined us. She looked at my father before speaking. "Thank you for giving her the childhood I couldn't." He shook his head gently. "We can't rewrite the past, Claire, but we can choose what we do tomorrow." Years later, when my first novel was published, I dedicated it to one man. On the first page, I wrote, "For Ethan Carter, who taught me that love is not measured by grand promises, but by the quiet decision to keep showing up every single day." People still ask whether I forgave my mother. I tell them that forgiveness does not erase pain, and it does not pretend the past never happened. Forgiveness simply allows the future to become larger than yesterday's mistakes. My mother spent years chasing a life that looked successful. My father spent those same years building a life that felt like home. One gave me memories filled with regret. The other gave me a childhood filled with love. If someone asks who truly raised me, my answer has never changed. The person who stayed became the greatest story I will ever tell. If you liked this story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.